You had a shrink ray. Would you ever so briefly blast your favorite PC case with it so you could have like a chibi version? We think Phanteks might have done just that with the old NV5. But we're gonna check it out to see for ourselves if the NV5 is truly a smaller NV7 or something so much more. Stick around because things are about to get tilted. Okay, I'll admit it, it's a bit of a stretch to call the Phanteks NV5 chibi. The new case, along with the forthcoming NV9, is an answer to a bigger what-if question. What if Phanteks made the NV7 just a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller? What makes us so excited for the NV5 is that in our benchmarks, the NV7 was one of the coolest cases. The Phanteks NV7 actually bested Lee's 011 Evo and 011 Evo XL for top marks in our gaming and idle test, while only falling 1 degree behind the Evo XL in CPU load temps. That's very impressive. If the NV5 can match or beat the NV7's performance in a mid-tower form factor, we're here for it. Don't be envious, NV7. We still love you, and we hope you still love us for all of our dad jokes. What isn't a dad joke is that since they announced the NV5, Phanteks went back to the drawing board with their pricing. Originally, the NV5 was slated to be released for $129.99, which would have been a premium, though not unreasonable price for such a mid-tower case. For context, if it stayed at the $130 mark, the NV5 would be a direct price competition with cases like Lee's 011 Dynamic, Corsair's iQOO 4000X RGB, and one of my favorite, the NZXT H7 Flow. Rather than being intimidated though by this lineup, Phanteks took a bigger swing and dropped the NV5's price to pass on the savings to you PC builders. Now priced at $99.99 for the black version and $109.99 for the white version. Both versions of the NV5 are backed by a 5-year limited warranty from Phanteks. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it plays out for them. Let's talk about dimensions and all of the materials as we dive in. The Phanteks NV5 is 9.41 inches wide, 18.77 inches deep, and about 21 inches tall. Compared to the NV7, the NV5 is roughly 5% less in width, 10% less in depth, and 8% less in height. So it's not quite a little guy, but it's so adorable to see the two next to each other. Though we don't have that, but you could pretend. I mean, our editors are really, maybe you're gonna see it here and they're like dancing. I'd love to see that. As for the weight, the NV5 clocks in at 11.28 kilograms or around 25 pounds. This hefty weight is all thanks to the solid steel chassis, which makes up the bulk of the construction as well as the tempered glass front and side panels. For context on the weight, without parts installed, the NV5 weighs roughly the same as a 2-year-old toddler or 2 liters of soda, pop, Coke, tonic, or whatever you call it. And for all you Starfield players who love to fill your ships with sandwiches, that's roughly 25 loaves of bread. When it comes to top case controls and I/O, the NV5 has both a powered switch and a recessed reset button, mode and color RGB controls for the integrated strip, more on that later, 1 USB-C Gen 2 port, 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, and a combined audio jack for headphones and microphone. In the box, the NV5 ships with a digital RGB, or DRGB as Phanteks is calling it, controller, as well as a DRGB motherboard adapter, a GPU support bracket, a screw assortment box, and 6 whole zip ties, which is super cute that they think 6 zip ties is gonna be enough for this massive case. Moving inside the case, the NV5 supports ATX, micro ATX, mini ITX, and eATX motherboards up to 280 millimeters. Now, while most eATX motherboards would technically fit, a girthy offering like the ROG Maximus Z790 Extreme would be pushing the upper limits. What about GPU sizes, Robey? The NV5 supports GPUs up to 17.32 inches long and 6.69 inches wide. So most cards on the market fall well within the dimensions and will work. How about PSU support? How much power can we slap? Ooh, that was really hard. How much power can we slap in this bad boy? The NV5 can accommodate PSUs up to 230 millimeters or around 9 inches in length. That means it can technically accommodate absolute units like the 1500 watt Corsair AHX 1500i, but Be careful with these long boys, there isn't a lot of room for cabling with longer PSUs. On a side note, if you're looking to build in the NV5 and you're worried about the PSU sizes, Phanteks has actually partnered with Seasonic to refresh their Revolt line of PSUs. Now these modular power supplies ship without cables to cut down on waste for users who want to use custom cabling from companies like CableMod. Here's the deal, do you know how many Molex cables we have lying around? I mean, they're useless. And speaking of cables, the front of the NV5's PSU shroud is actually removable. So if you forgot to plug in a cable or need to plug in a new one, removing this cover actually gives users an access point directly to the PSU, provided you have small enough hands to get in there. Now, while we're looking at this area of the case, I want to point out the integrated DRGB strip that runs along the edge of the PSU shroud. This thing is loaded with up to 30 LEDs, creating a really smooth colorway here. That's like 30 times 100. That's also 3,000 extra frames, so it's like 3,000 FPS. Now the RGB strip can be connected directly to the motherboard via a 3-pin adapter, or you can link it up with the other Phanteks DRGB products just using their included JST connector. When it comes to room for CPU cooler, the NV5 is really going to thrive with all-in-one closed-loop CPU coolers, like the one we have right here. While there is around 6.5 inches of clearance and you could technically fit an air cooler, it would be ill-advised because there's no way to get direct airflow to it. By the way, if you're counting the technicalities, they seem to be piling up. For the AIO fit, the NV5 can either fit a 240mm or 360mm radiator at the top or on the side of the case. As for fan mounting options, there is room in the NV5 for 8 120mm fans, 3 on the side, 3 on the top, 1 in the case rear, and 1 in the bottom of the case. It's kind of useless. We'll get more to that later. It is important to note that the NV5 does not ship with fans. Much like the power supplies, Phanteks does have some new fans, the D30s, and you know what? They look really good in this PC case. Now, as for home storage, you can put 40 houses in this thing. As for a home for storage, the Phanteks NV5 has room for 3 3.5-inch hard drives or 4 2.5-inch SSDs. These mounting options are located behind the motherboard on a fold-out tray that also doubles as a cable management cover. Now that we know what the NV5 can technically do, let's just check out an actual build inside of it. Overall, building in the Phanteks NV5 was pretty straightforward for a mid-tower case. There are some things that we really liked, some things that left us a little bit disappointed, and some spots where we felt like we needed to be more calculated in our cable runs and our order of operation. For now, we're going to focus on the order of operations as it pertains to building. Unlike the NV7, the side intake fan and top radiator mounts are not in removable brackets. So, we had to consider all the cable runs for the AIO and fans, as well as some motherboard cables before mounting the radiator to the top of the case. This was made a bit more challenging by small cutouts at the top of the case. Seriously, these two little guys here, we kind of wish like the whole top section was just a little bit more open. Interestingly, the piece that had a removable bracket was the little piece down at the bottom for the little fan. With the very bottom of the case being at an angle, it was nice to have a flat surface to work with. However, we did wish that this bracket was reversible or that there was an option to angle the fan like we kind of had on the NV7. As we built, we had to keep in mind that this was a showpiece case. So for all of our cable and wire runs, we had to actually be very careful, planning every single run out. If we didn't take that extra time, we were gonna have them sticking out in awkward places, and nobody wants awkward cable sticking out. Now this is where daisy chaining fans and RGB together can be super helpful. We also noticed that if builders wanted to use like 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives, using the drive tray in the back, it would be the absolute last thing you'd need to do. At least the cables for those drives would need to be the last ones you connected. Oh, and you're probably going to need some longer SATA cables to accommodate for the tray's swing. Though, you know, one thing that is actually pretty awesome about the tray is that it's really, unlike the Lee, that thing sticks and holds. So good job on that one, Phanteks. Now, since we're talking about cabling, we have to talk about PSU installation. In case you didn't notice, the bottom of this case is tilted at an angle, and that includes the PSU compartment. Unlike the NV7, this is not adjustable, which is actually really unfortunate. With how the PSU is mounted, there was a lot of wasted space. So there's no tucking cables behind the PSU. I mean, I love hiding those things, and they make it actually a little bit harder. While the front of the shroud is removable, and this gives access to the PSU unless you have really small hands or the supernatural ability of plugging things in without seeing them. Nope, I don't. You're gonna wanna plug everything in before installing it, or you could use something like the Corsair Shift and use the access to tuck the cables along the side of the PSU, which, I mean, this is a perfect case for the Corsair Shift. There is more about the build experience that we'll talk about as we kind of wrap a pretty bow on this review, but first, let's get into performance. To keep things consistent with the rest of our testing metrics for ATX cases, we used all of the same components in all of the cases. And if you want to know what those components are, check down in the description below. But let's talk about performance. Now, we compared the Phanteks NV5 with a whack of cases and crowd favorites like the Lee & Lee 0-in-1 Dynamic Evo XL, the Height Y40, and the Fractal North, as well as the NV5's big brother, the Phanteks NV7. All of which you can see videos of right here on Robeytech. No NV9 yet though. We haven't done the NV9. It's coming, it's not out yet. So calm down. Now, as we ran our series of tests and benchmarks, we recorded thermal performance of both the CPU and the GPU. Now here is what we discovered. While idle, the NV5 CPU temps hovered around 30 degrees Celsius, while GPU temps were around 31 degrees Celsius. For a comparative standpoint, this put the NV5's performance in line with the NZXT H9 Elite and the Height Y40. We need to keep an eye on this because these two troublemakers have a bit of a reputation for putting on a dazzling display, but running hotter than we would actually like them to. However, under CPU load, the NV5 followed the influence of the actual NV7, pulling around 73 degrees Celsius. That is just 1 degree away from where Lee & Lee's 0-in-1D Evo XL landed at 72, and 1 degree better than the Fractal North at 74. This is fantastic news for the NV5. And notice the fantastic, because it's with the, we're showing it. Now, what about gaming? Now, during our 1440p gaming benchmarks, the NV5 hung out at the cooler end of the playing field with the Evo XL and the Antec P20C, with CPU temps hovering at 47 degrees Celsius, but GPU temps hit 66. Much like the Height Y40, it couldn't quite keep up with the NV7's 44C CPU temps and 61C GPU temps. But for a case that is significantly smaller, we're plenty pleased with the CPU performance. As for the GPU performance, we have to talk about that in relation to some other things we've mentioned, and we'll cover that a little bit later on. It's coming, I promise. So as we come down to the end of our review of the Phanteks NV5, we have a few loose ends we need to tie up and all of those technicalities we talked about, including GPU thermals during gameplay. We pointed out that the NV5 can support eATX motherboards, larger GPUs, larger PSUs, and air coolers. But there are two major detriments that we see in taking on those avenues. The first is cable management. And most of you are like, and we're done with this review. Who cares about cable management? But for those of you who do, while the NV5 has a decent amount of it, it always fills up faster than you think in showcase PCs like this. While the pass-through grommets are a nice touch, except for the one in the middle that just doesn't have a use. But anyway, it can be awkward when pushing the space's limits with larger components. All of this pales in comparison to the biggest challenge facing the NV5, airflow, or more specifically, air volume. Now, when we saw in our benchmarks, specifically as we looked at the GPU temps in gaming, is that there is just not a lot of air in the case to move around the GPU. Now, while we did our best to set our 4070 Ti up for success, there wasn't much more we could do. Because the bottom fan is like its placement and angle, there's only about 20% overlap between the fan and the GPU. So it doesn't actually give a whole lot of help. The side intake fans, they do get air into the case, but it's actually indirect airflow, and we actually saw this very same situation inside of the Height Y40. That fan, is just for show, and there's a reason it's not in this build right now. We say all of that to say that if you're gonna be using the NV5, filling the case with bigger and or hotter running components, a lack of air volume and or blocked airflow are going to seriously restrict the component's potential. We think that this is a difficult thing for us to say with the NV5, restricted potential. However, one of the things that you can do, and it's just something to be aware of, is using much more powerful fans, like for instance the D30, which should help alleviate some of this. See, here's the deal. Its design is stunning, and it really is interesting to look at, but it feels a little bit like it's held back from what it could be because of what it was trying to be. It feels like the NV5 is like a younger person that's grown up in the shadow of a talented older sibling, albeit it has a very massive forehead, trying so hard to measure up rather than feeling the freedom to do its very own thing. Now, for all of you out there who feel psychoanalyzed by that statement, or you have a really large forehead, I'm not sure whether I'm gonna say I'm sorry or you're welcome. However, much like all of those positive things, there's a lot that we loved about the NV5. Not just because it's trying to be a smaller NV7, not because it doesn't have a massive forehead, but because it's a genuinely stunning case in its own right, without a massive forehead. Sorry, I really don't like the big forehead on the NV7. Now, we love the overall build quality and structural makeup. I mean, this is a solidly constructed case with angled edges that really make it stand out in the crowd of otherwise boxy options. The RGB strips that accents the PSU shroud and gives you 3000 FPS is smooth and easy to plug into the motherboard. It also doesn't require proprietary software, which is honestly a big bonus. And I'll be honest, let's just pause here for a second. Let me just say, the lighting effects on this are legit. At the end of the day, the NV5 doesn't quite strike us as a smaller version of the NV7 as much as it tries, though without a bigger forehead. In a certain light, it certainly favors the appearance of the NV7 without a bigger forehead, but it misses some major elements that we loved the NV7 for, like the angled airflow GPU stuff. That was absolutely awesome. These are our impressions of the NV5 from Phanteks, but we want to know what you think. Are you excited to see the NV7-like mid-tower case without a big forehead? Would you build in the NV5, or do you like bigger cases? Let us know all of it down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, go ahead and slap that subscribe button with that like button and ring that notification bell so that you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this right here on Robeytech. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm sorry if you had a big forehead, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.